The first shot cracked through the dry Wyoming air like thunder that had forgotten rain. Jonas Ward was halfway across the street when he heard the cry, sharp, female, desperate. He turned just in time to see the crowd parting around her, faces lit with that ugly kind of excitement that only fear can breed. Dust hung thick, the color of rust and judgment. She stood at the center, a woman in a torn black shawl, hair the pale gold of dry wheat, eyes wide but calm. Her wrists were bound with rope. Beside her, Sheriff Hastings raised his rifle, and the town preacher muttered a prayer that sounded more like a sentence. Someone spat. She cursed the Miller boy. 3 days after she passed their gate, he took sick. She ain't human, another growled. Jonas didn't think. He'd seen mobs before, cattle or men, it didn't much matter. Once panic starts, truth stops. Don't shoot the cursed woman, he said, voice steady, carrying across the square like a slow roll of thunder. I'll take her home. The sheriff's hand froze on the trigger. Heads turned. The silence that followed was heavier than any gunshot. You'll what? Hastings asked. Jonas walked forward, boots scraping the dust. You heard me. He looked at the woman. She met his gaze, no plea in her eyes, only a strange peace. She's my angel, he added softly, though even he didn't know why those words came out. Maybe it was something about her stillness, the way she didn't fight. Maybe it was because she looked like someone who'd already lost everything there was to lose. Laughter broke from the crowd, harsh and mean. Angel, she burned her own husband's house down. Jonas stopped in front of her, close enough to see the bruises on her wrists. Then she's paid enough, he said quietly. Untie her! The sheriff lowered his rifle but didn't move. You sure you want this, Ward? She brings bad luck. Half the town swears it. Jonas' mouth twitched. Then it's a good thing I don't believe in luck. He reached for the rope himself. When he touched her hands, she flinched, not from him but from the murmurs rising again. He could feel her trembling, though she kept her head high. Why are you doing this? She whispered, her voice dry as sand. Because no one else will, he said. Behind them, someone shouted, If you take her, don't come back. Jonas turned his head slightly. I wasn't planning to. He cut the rope with his pocket knife, and the sound of it snapping seemed to echo longer than the shot that had started everything. He took her by the arm, gently, and led her through the parting crowd. People stepped back, crossing themselves, whispering. She walked stiffly beside him, barefoot, eyes fixed on the dusty road ahead. When they reached his horse, she stopped. You're not afraid of me? He looked at her, really looked, at the dirt streaks on her face, the faint shimmer of tears she wouldn't let fall. Afraid? He said. Lady, I've seen worse things than a woman with a rumor. For the first time. She almost smiled, not with her mouth but with her eyes, a tiny flicker of life breaking through. Jonas helped her onto the horse and climbed up behind, careful not to crowd her. The crowd didn't follow, but their silence did. As they rode out of town, the sun dropped behind the buttes, bleeding red across the horizon. The wind smelled of dust and rain that hadn't come in months. Evelyn, though he didn't yet know her name, looked back once. The town was already fading into the haze. Where are you taking me? She asked quietly. Home, Jonas said. Or whatever's left of one. She nodded, and for a long time neither spoke. The horse's hooves beat slow and steady, carrying them away from judgment, into a country that belonged to no one. Behind them, thunder rolled again, but this time, it sounded like change. By the time they reached the ridge above Dry Creek, night had swallowed the plains. The wind was a cold hand, dragging across their faces, smelling of sage and faraway rain. Jonas Ward could feel the woman's weight sagging in front of him. She hadn't spoken for miles. He guided the horse down toward a narrow valley where a single lantern glowed through the dark. His cabin. Ain't much, he muttered, half to her, half to himself. But it keeps the wind out. She didn't answer. Maybe she was too tired, or maybe words had worn thin in her world long before he found her. When they stopped by the hitching post, Jonas swung down, boots crunching on the frozen ground. He offered a hand. She hesitated, then took it. Her fingers were cold, bone-light. Mind the step, he said quietly as they crossed the porch. Inside, the place was small. Just one room, a stove, a rough-hewn table, and a bed pushed against the far wall. The air smelled of ash and leather. Jonas struck a match and lit the lamp, the warm light pushing back the shadows. She stood by the door, shawl clutched around her shoulders, eyes scanning everything like she might be tested for trespassing. "You can sit," he said, nodding to the chair. "Ain't cursed furniture far as I know." That got him a faint sound, not quite laughter, but close enough to make him look up. "I didn't ask you to do this," she said finally, voice barely above a whisper. "I know." He poured water from the kettle into a tin mug. "Most people don't ask for mercy. They just hope someone notices." She took the mug, holding it with both hands, as if to steady herself. Steam curled up between them. For a while only the crackle of the fire spoke. Jonas busied himself, hanging his coat, checking the stove, trying not to look like he was studying her. But he was. There was something about the way she sat, straight-backed, quiet, like a person trying to disappear without leaving the room. He remembered his brother, fevered and dying years ago. The prayer that had drifted through the night from some unknown woman's voice. He'd never forgotten it, or the calm that followed. "What's your name?" he asked. "Evelyn." She didn't lift her eyes. "Evelyn Crow," he nodded slowly. "Crow, huh? Thought that name sounded familiar." Her head lifted, a flicker of alarm. "You've heard about me?" "Everyone's heard something," he said, sitting across from her. "But gossip's cheaper than bullets and twice as dirty." That made her meet his gaze. "Then why risk your life for me?" He leaned back in his chair, the old wood creaking. "Guess I don't like seeing folks shot for weather in whispers." She blinked, surprised by the simplicity of it. "You believe I'm cursed?" He shook his head. "I believe you've had worse luck than most." "That's not the same thing." The words settled between them, heavy and gentle all at once. Outside, the wind rattled the shutters. She flinched at the sound. "You can rest here tonight," he said after a moment. "I'll take the floor. I can't take your bed." "Then call it a trade," he said. "You get the bed. I get to know I didn't ride all that way for nothing." She looked at him for a long while, then nodded once. Slow, grateful, though she tried not to show it. When he turned down the lamp, the firelight softened her face. She looked younger, less ghost than woman. Jonas lay by the stove, eyes half closed, listening to her breathing even out. He didn't believe in curses, but he did believe in silence. And that night, the quiet between them felt like a kind of prayer. Outside, wind moved through the valley like a sigh, carrying away the last echoes of the town that had tried to burn her. And for the first time in years, Jonas Ward slept without dreaming. Morning came quiet and blue, the kind of light that softens the hard edges of things. The frost on the window had begun to melt, and the fire in the stove was only a low glow. Jonas Ward woke to the faint sound of movement, soft steps, a kettle being lifted. He sat up, joints complaining, and saw Evelyn Crow by the stove, her hair unbraided, catching the morning light like a pale halo. She moved carefully, as though afraid the floorboards might protest her being there. "Didn't mean to wake you," she said, voice still rough from sleep. "You didn't," he replied. Though she had, he watched her pour water into a pot. The smell of coffee, weak but honest, drifted through the cabin. It had been years since anyone had stood in that kitchen but him. Years since another pair of hands had reached for the same tin cups, the same chipped plates. Evelyn glanced at him. "You don't talk much, do you?" Jonas smiled faintly. "Usually nobody worth talking to." She almost smiled back. Almost. "Then I'll take that as a compliment." He sat up fully now, pulling on his boots. "How's your hand?" She looked down at her wrist, the bruises faintly visible. "Better. Rope burns fade faster than names, though." He nodded, thinking of how the town had shouted at her, the way fear could strip people of mercy. "They'll forget sooner than you think," he said. Evelyn shook her head. "People don't forget a curse. They just find new names to call it." The kettle began to whistle, saving him from answering. He took it off the stove and poured coffee into 2 tin cups. Their fingers brushed as he handed one to her. "Thank you," she said softly. "Don't mention it," he replied, though her gratitude felt heavier than words could carry. They sat at the table, quiet for a while. Outside, wind rolled through the valley, moving the grass in long silver waves. The silence between them wasn't awkward anymore. It was something gentler, like rest after too many miles. Jonas studied her face in the morning light. There were lines of weariness there, but also something unbroken. He wondered how she'd survived alone all that time. What kind of faith keeps a soul upright when the world keeps knocking it down? "You had a husband once," he said finally. Not as a question, but an understanding. She stared into her cup. "I did. The fire took him. The house, too. Folks said I started it. I was the only one who lived." He waited. "I prayed every night after," she went on quietly, "for a sign that I wasn't meant to die with him. None came, only stares and whispers. So I left the ashes behind and tried to outwalk my own name." Jonas felt the ache of her words settle somewhere deep. "You didn't deserve that." She gave a small, tired laugh. "Deserve's a funny word out here. Folks get what comes, not what's fair," he wanted to argue, to tell her she was wrong, but he'd seen too much to make promises he couldn't keep. Instead, he stood, fetched his coat, and said, "Roof's been leaking since last spring. I'll patch it today before the snow finds a way in. I can help," she offered. He hesitated, then nodded. "All right, pass me nails when I ask, and mind the ladder." By midday, she was steadying boards while he hammered them in. They worked mostly in silence, but something wordless passed between them, the rhythm of two people slowly remembering how to trust. When a gust of wind scattered her shawl, Jonas caught it before it hit the ground. She looked at him, surprised, then smiled, a real one this time. Small but alive. The sound of that smile, if smiles could make sound, stayed with him long after they went back inside. That night, as snow began to fall for the first time in months, Evelyn mended one of his shirts by lamplight while Jonas whittled a piece of pine near the fire. No grand speeches, no sudden confessions, just the quiet truth of company, he thought. Watching her, that maybe curses could be broken this way, not by prayers or proof, but by presence. Outside, the wind softened, carrying the faint scent of snow and cedar. Inside, the cabin felt less like shelter and more like home. By late winter, the valley had changed. Snow still covered the ground in a thin, stubborn layer, but beneath it, the earth felt alive again. Jonas Ward could sense it, the quiet pulse of coming spring. Evelyn had begun to hum while she worked, small sounds that reminded him of wind through tall grass. They had fallen into a rhythm. She baked, he repaired fences. She read from an old Bible by lamplight. He carved wood beside her. Neither spoke of the town, though both carried its shadow in their sleep. Then one gray morning, a knock came at the door. Not the hesitant kind either. Sharp, official, like a verdict. Jonas looked up from his coffee. "Stay here," he said, though his voice betrayed the unease crawling up his spine. When he opened the door, Sheriff Cole Hastings stood there, coat dusted with frost, hat pulled low. Two men from Dry Creek hovered behind him, rifles slung but ready. "Morning, Ward," the sheriff said. "Heard tell you've been keeping company with the Crow woman." Jonas didn't move. "You heard right." The sheriff's eyes narrowed. "Ain't smart keeping trouble under your roof. The sickness hit Miller's ranch again last week. Folks are saying. Folks say a lot when they don't understand something." Jonas cut in, his voice flat. The sheriff shifted, clearly uncomfortable. "They're scared, Jonas. You know how this goes. Fear turns ugly." "Then maybe you ought to remind them what justice looks like," Jonas said. Cole's expression hardened. "Justice is what keeps this town standing. If you protect her, they'll turn on you too." Jonas gave a small, humorless smile. Wouldn't be the first time. Evelyn had appeared quietly in the doorway behind him, shawl drawn tight. Her eyes met the sheriff's, calm, steady. "If they need a villain, let it be me." "Just leave him be," Jonas turned sharply. "No," Cole raised a hand. "Ma'am, it ain't that simple. The town's gathering come sundown. They want proof she ain't cursed, or—" He trailed off, not wanting to finish the sentence. "Or you'll hang her," Jonas said for him. The sheriff's jaw worked. But he didn't deny it. Jonas stepped closer, his shadow falling across the threshold. "You tell them this. If they want her, they'll have to come through me." The men behind Cole shifted nervously. The sheriff sighed, tipped his hat. "You're making this hard, Ward. I don't want to bury another friend." "Then don't," Jonas said, and closed the door. That night, the cabin felt smaller, the air heavier. Evelyn sat by the fire, hands trembling around a cup of tea she didn't drink. "You shouldn't have said that," she whispered. "They'll come. I know." "Jonas," he looked at her then, eyes tired but fierce. "You think I saved you just to let them take you now?" She stared at him for a long moment, the silence between them stretching thin. "You don't owe me anything." "Maybe not," he said. "But maybe I owe something to the part of myself that still believes people can be more than what fear makes them." Outside, a distant murmur rose, voices carried by the wind. The townsfolk were gathering early. Evelyn stood. "If I leave now, maybe they'll stop." He shook his head. "You walk out that door, you'll prove them right." She hesitated, tears gathering but not falling. "Then what do we do?" Jonas looked at the rifle hanging by the door, then back at her. "We wait. And if they come, we face them. Together." When the first torches appeared down the hill, the firelight caught her face. Not afraid anymore, only resolute. Jonas stood beside her at the window, his hand resting lightly on her shoulder. "They called me cursed," she said softly. "But maybe it was just that I kept surviving." He gave a slow nod. "Then maybe survival's the only kind of blessing worth having." Outside, the wind shifted. The torches wavered, and for a moment the whole world seemed to hold its breath right before the storm broke loose. By dawn, the fire outside had gone cold. The mob was gone too, scattered sometime during the night when the clouds broke and rain began to fall for the first time in months. Jonas Ward stood in the doorway, soaked through, watching the water run off the roof in thin silver lines. His rifle leaned forgotten against the wall. Behind him, Evelyn Crow slept curled on the cot, her face soft in the gray light. For a long while he just listened, to the steady rhythm of rain on the tin roof, to the sound of her breathing. He hadn't meant for things to end this way. He'd only meant to buy her time. But maybe time was what redemption needed most. When she woke, the room was warmer. He had stoked the stove and laid her shawl over a chair to dry. She sat up slowly, dazed, as if the silence itself were unfamiliar. "They're gone?" she asked. He nodded. "Storm drove 'em off." "Guess even anger knows when to run from thunder." She managed a faint smile. "You stood in front of them all night." "Didn't have much choice," he said, turning back to the window. "Wasn't going to let 'em take what little good this valley's got left." Evelyn rose and came closer, bare feet whispering against the floorboards. "You could have been killed." He met her eyes, steady and calm. "So could you. But here we are." She looked away then, staring at the rain. "I never asked for saving." "I know," he said softly. "Doesn't mean you didn't deserve it." The words hit her like warmth in winter, something she hadn't known she'd missed until it returned. That afternoon, the rain slowed to a gentle drizzle. The air smelled of earth and renewal. Jonas went outside to check the fence line while Evelyn gathered kindling by the porch. Every sound, the creak of wet wood, the distant cry of a hawk, felt sharper, cleaner. When he returned, she was standing by the garden patch, looking at the muddy ground where green shoots had begun to poke through. "It's coming back," she said. "Everything does." "If you give it a chance," he replied. She smiled, but there was sadness in it. "The town won't forgive me, Jonas. Not really." He wiped his hands on a rag. "Maybe they don't have to. You ain't theirs to forgive." The words hung in the air, simple and solid. Later that evening, the sheriff rode up alone. His hat dripped rain. His face looked older than it had 2 days ago. "Town's quiet," he said, staying by his horse. "They saw the storm and figured it meant something." "Maybe providence, maybe just guilt." Jonas didn't answer. Cole sighed. "You can come back now. Both of you. No one's gonna raise a hand." Evelyn stepped out onto the porch, shawl around her shoulders. "And if I don't want to?" The sheriff hesitated, then nodded. "Then don't. Sometimes leaving's the only way to start again." He tipped his hat and rode off without another word. Jonas watched him go, the sound of hooves fading into the wet distance. Evelyn turned toward him, eyes shining in the soft lamplight. "So," she said quietly, "what happens now?" He looked at her, really looked, and something inside him eased like a knot coming undone. "Now we build." "Build what?" He smiled a little. "Whatever we can keep standing." She let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. And for the first time since the world had turned against her, she laughed, a small, real laugh that filled the cabin like sunlight. Days turned into weeks. The snow melted. Grass pushed through the mud. Evelyn painted the window frames white. Jonas rebuilt the barn roof, and the land around them began to breathe again. Sometimes neighbors rode by and waved. No one mentioned curses anymore. Some even left food at the gate, quiet offerings of apology they'd never say aloud. One evening, as the sun bled gold across the valley, Evelyn stood outside with Jonas. Watching the light fade behind the hills, "Do you ever wonder," she said, "why you did it that day?" He thought for a moment. "Maybe I was saving more than just you." She tilted her head. "What else?" He smiled faintly. "Myself." The wind carried her soft laughter across the field. When the first stars appeared, he took her hand, calloused, small, alive, and for the first time in years, he didn't feel like a man alone against the world. The rain had washed the curse clean. What was left was quiet, and human, and enough. And as dusk settled, Jonas whispered the only words that fit the moment. "You're home now."